All right, well, as everybody knows by now, my name is Bruce Brown. I'm 70 years old, moved here in 1962. Came from the west end of Vancouver, and when my dad was a salesman in there for a major wholesale paper company. So what happened was he got promoted. So he got the manager to be a manager here over in Quadra Street. The old Dad's Cookie Factory downtown was Crown Zellerback at that time. So he became the manager of Crown Zellerback. So we had to move. We ended up at the end of 10 Mile Point. And when 10 Mile Point in 1962 was still quite wild out there. None of that stuff was up top. It was just a big gravel quarry and everything else. And we got this beautiful home. Dad sold for $12,500 in Vancouver, and we bought this new place for $27,500. And we had an 8-foot beautiful glass show window that looked right out on Mount Baker. The road there was still dirt. So it was a great place to grow up. It was all woods in behind me at that time, which it still is. There was a park there behind our house there. So I started going to school and trying to meet new friends and that, and I met Frank Hobbs School. And man, that thing's old now, I tell you, because it was pretty aged when I first got there in the first place. So what happened, you know, the first few years of schooling and that, everything went pretty well. You know, I was good at finger painting and all this type of stuff and participating with everything. It wasn't until you started to do a little bit more like your arithmetic and spelling that I started to run into a bit of an issue. What happened was we'd have a spelling test or whatever, and I'd get 25 out of 25, but the problem is it was all wrong. And same with my math, you know, you got 25 out of 25 questions, but one problem is they're all wrong. So they thought I really wasn't trying. So back then, they had no idea that people could be dyslexic. And I had problems with reading and writing, and back then, also, the teachers had no idea what to do with a person like that. They just thought you were fooling around, didn't think there was anything wrong. It's just you're not trying. You're not, you know, doing what you're supposed to. You're not like the rest of the kids. So what happened was someone decided that I should get glasses because they figure I can't see. So I don't know who the brilliant guy came up that figured you put glasses on makes you a better speller, but this was the way they were going. So I went down, I was what, 9 years old now, 10 years old, and down to have my eyes tested. And the fellow that was doing the testing, he could see that I could see all the letters and everything okay, everything's fine that way, but he couldn't figure out why I couldn't get things right. So what he did was he took off and went to a library, he came back with some books and that, and he says, Bruce, I'm gonna ask you to do something. I said, what's that? He says, okay. So he wrote down 6 plus 6 and 7 plus 7. He says, can you do these equations for me? I said, sure. So I wrote down my answers and that. So then, not looking at my paper, he says to me, all right, what's 6 plus 6? I said, 12. Okay. And what about 7 plus 7? 14. Okay, let's see what you wrote. 21 and 42. So he says, you are dyslexic. So I said, Mom, at that time, well, what's this? So she says that, well, it's a brain thing. Basically, it's reversing numbers. And so basically, if the teachers looked at the paperwork that he did and put the letters, all the letters are in there, like even my spelling, the letters were all correct, but they were absolutely mixed up. But he said, that if any of my math tests, if they went back to them and they would just turn the numbers around, I would have been fine. So then that got me through my schooling. They finally decided that, you know, I just have a disability. And back then they didn't know how to treat it. So basically at this point, instead of bothering with me, they just left me alone. So just do your thing, and we'll just, except for one teacher. He wanted me to read in front of the class all the time. He wanted me to stand up and read, which I had a complete issue to do. It was me and this other fellow named Mike, and he was a stutterer. And this teacher forced us to read. And then when we were making our mistakes, he'd just sit there and kill himself laughing. No. You know, and this is the way it was back in the 60s and early 70s. And basically they told me at that time I'd be nothing more than a ditch digger or whatever. You know, you haven't got hope of a career, So I carried on. I went in the vending business for a little while. I did that for a while, and that worked out really well. I was just filling candy machines and coffee, and then I worked my way up to I was selling coffee services, and so this goes on. And then finally they decided that I needed to see a psychiatrist because I'm still having issues, right? So I go to the psychiatrist, and he comes up with the idea, because I had no friends, because people didn't know how to be around me because they just thought I was weird and different, which I was, but that's beside the point. So this psychiatrist said I needed a friend all this time, so he got me a puppet so I could talk to this puppet and I could be able to keep this puppet along with me. So I don't know, looks like you're the right age group. What did we all do on Sunday nights and watch on TV?
Ed Sullivan.
Ed Sullivan. Who would puppets would be on Ed Sullivan? Topo Gigio, and then every once in a while Charlie McCarthy would come on, all that. So I got so interested in ventriloquism because I had the time to do it because I really didn't have a lot of friends. So I became a ventriloquist. So that was great because I was doing Christmas parties, kids' birthday parties, nothing big or anything like that. And then I decided that I'd do some videos on it. So I get my puppets out and I do these videos. And this fella back east named Gerald, he became the biggest fan. And if there's one dummy I've got is named Danny. And he's a cheeky little brat. And he absolutely loved him. So I started making all these little videos and all that. So finally I decided that my son was getting married. He lived in Toronto. He's Jared's good friend. So they said, bring Danny. Bring Danny with you. Jared just wants to meet Danny, all this type of stuff. So I go back there, and what they did was when I showed up there, they said, we got a surprise for you. I said, what's that? He says, we booked you into a club. I says, you did what? I says, you and Danny we booked you into a club. And I'm sitting there going, oh, God, here we go. I've done kids' birthday parties, all this type of stuff. We're in Toronto. Booked me into this club. So I said, okay, all right, when is it? Tuesday night. So now it's Saturday, so I got to write some Toronto jokes, which is really easy to do. I mean, it's awful. I mean, like, that city, I just drove me nuts just being there for that little while. I think the best joke that they ever came up with, it says, why does it take 4 hours to get there and 7 hours to get back when you're flying? It's because Toronto sucks. So I end up at this club. So I said, what time are we going there? And he says, well, the club doesn't open till 8. I'm like, what? And he says, it doesn't open till 8. And I says, probably the entertainment's on at 10. Oh, great. So I've got my little dummy in my bag and all this type of stuff. I walk in, and this place was just about 300 people sitting there. They've been drinking for hours. And I'm thinking, oh, these people might not want to see a puppet show. So I'm sitting there starting to worry about this. I'm thinking, oh my, what's this going to be like? So then the comedian says, so the bartender comes up and says, well, you're number 5 up. And he says, there's 4 comedians in front of you, and you'll be number 5. And then the headliner comes up after that. And I said, oh, okay. So I thought I'd see how it goes for everybody else. And these people they called comedians were the filthiest mouth people. Every other word was a swear word, and they were terrible. And they would yell so you couldn't even understand what they're talking about. And the crowd was getting louder and louder, ignoring all the comedians. And then after about the 3rd comedian, the bartender comes up to me and says, hey, Bruce, the headliner's not going to make it tonight, so you're the headliner now. So I'm sitting there going, oh, God, I'm going to be working right. I have drunks right here, in front of me, and they're hassling the comedians. So I come walking up with my little bag. I put my bag down, and I says, it's your lucky day. They said, what's that? And the guys are going, huh? What do you mean lucky day? He says, I'm a ventriloquist. And the place went dead silent, absolutely dead silent. And I go, oh, God, here we go. So I pulled Danny out, and Danny, basically I just said, so I pulled Danny out, I've got him sitting there, and I say, look, after these last few comedians, I just want to let you know that I do different types of shows. I've never had a swear word in my show. I keep a nice, clean show. We're just here to have some fun. Okay? And you hear a few people say okay. And old Danny's over there going, screw that, you know? So, but I settled him down. It's okay. And then this guy started hassling a little bit, so Danny went after him. He went after him. Pretty soon they were the best of friends. He was sending beers up to Danny. He was buying Danny beer. So it went really well. You could have heard a pin drop when I was performing. And I actually, when you have an audience that's with you like that, you're a better show. You're a much better show. So this was what I did with Danny in Toronto, and they actually asked me to come back the following weekend, and I said, well, I can't, sorry, I'm back in Victoria at that time. So that's how, little bit of touch now. Now you know that, you know, I've had this little disability, and now I've had the friend of them, I got my Danny there and everything else, so carry on with my life a little bit again. So I worked as that company that my dad came over to manage. I ended up working there for 25 years. I was picking orders in the warehouse out on Keating Cross Road. And at that time it was Crown Zellerback, then it was Crown Paper, and then it was Unisource. And then I'll get to that in a minute, what happened to it. But so I'm working in the warehouse, and I could pick orders because I figured out to myself, all these doctors and optometrists and whoever was looking after me, trying to get, I figured out, you know, if you take your finger and you look at 41 and you go 1, 4, 41, you put it down. I was reading like cross like this. I learned how to do that. So if I'm picking an order in the warehouse for 46 boxes of toilet paper, I could just go, okay, they want 46. Okay, then I go put it together. It would register in the brain. So I worked there for 25 years, and I worked in the warehouse, and then I became a truck driver, and then at the end, I was a warehouse manager. So I was looking after the warehouse, 33 people, 9 trucks on the road, and everything was going great until someone in Vancouver said, if we close that branch, look how much money we could save. We could put 33 people out of work we don't have to pay anymore. We get 9 trucks out of here. We don't be paying Ryder for 9 trucks anymore. And $25,000 a month for rent, gone. So he says, we ship everything out of, we only need a salesman over there, and we'll just ship everything every day. So that's what they did. They're still doing that today. There's actually one person, one person, his name's Steve, that survived the whole thing because they wanted like a billboard on the island here, and they have the truck running around. I don't even know what the name of the company is now. Unisource is gone, but when Steve was here for the last few years that I worked, or he worked there, or he's still working there, he had this big red truck running around with Unisource so people could actually still see the name in town. But other than that, it was just basically a dream job for him. It was basically just drive around all day. And all they did was, if there was any mistakes, he'd just go and pick up the mistakes and send them back. And so he did really, really well on it. So then moving on again. So now I'm out of work. So I've, you know, I took a few months off. And then I'm looking around in the paper and Butch Art Gardens needs a guy to drive their Model T. Oh, well, that'd be all right. So I went and did that for 6 years too, driving their Model T, setting it up, displays and all that. And then I was out, actually before that, I became a car salesman. And if you ever want to know anything about buying a car, I'm your guy. Because I couldn't believe it when I went there. I used to go down and I enjoy cars. I love cars. And I used to go down every Saturday with my buddy down to the Chev dealership downtown, and we'd hang out down there and we'd look at all the new cars every year, or every week. And finally they said, look, if you're going to be here, why don't you just sell some of these, you know, because he's know more about them than the salesman, and you know all this, everything about the cars. So I thought, well, all right. So then we had a guy, we had to do schooling there. I figured, like, when you were a car salesman, you know, all you did was walk up, hi, my name's Bruce, welcome to the dealership, what can we do for you? No, we had training. And we had this guy named Paul Cummings. We had to watch all these different videos every Saturday morning, and also at night we had to watch them too in our own time. And I got nothing out of it. I mean, like, the stuff they had in these things didn't make any sense to me at all, except one thing stuck with me. And I thought, oh, this is the only point I took out of hundreds of these videos I watch. It was called Scratch the Record. I go, scratch the record, what's that? And he says, if you want to sell a car, do something that other salesmen don't do. He says, change it up. And for instance, if someone came to a dealership and say, I need a car, I love my car, was sitting at the side of the road and a guy sideswiped it. ICBC wrote it off, I need a new car. Every salesman that these people came to would say, oh, gee, that's too bad. I know how you can get attached to a car. Oh, wow, that's really, really bad. Maybe we can find something for you. They came and see me. The guy comes in and says, I parked my car on the road last night and it absolutely got totaled. I say, terrific. You need a new car? I need to buy groceries. This is going to work out just fine. We can get the, it'll be push and pull. We'll get this done. So that's the way I would treat people on the lot also. And I also had someone come up to me one day. He's walking by. I just sold 3 cars that day. And this fellow's walking by. I was sitting there with the manager, and this guy walks by and he goes, oh, you can't sell me a car today. And I said, want to bet? And he says, well, I'm just in service. Oh, yeah, what have you got? And he says, a 2003 Buick Century. I said, great car. What's wrong with it? He says, oh, something with the transmission. Ooh, you know what I just got in? Out of Oak Bay, and this was real. It was about a 2-year-old Buick Allure, black on black with lots of chrome. It was a beautiful car. 2 hours later, see ya. So then this was going along, and all of a sudden I decided, well, I was getting kind of bored with the same routine all the way. So I decided, well, maybe I'll take Danny to work. It seemed like a good idea at the time, so I took my little dummy, put him in the bag, put it under my desk, and I'd sit there and I'd do a deal, like go for the test drive, come back, bring the people into the desk. Everything would go great until you got to the point where, how much is my trade worth? And I says, well, this is what it's worth. I says, we've got to recondition it. It's also over 5 years old, hard to finance at that time, maybe get 1 or 2 years financing. Someone that comes in for the same amount of money, they can buy a brand new car. Sure, they'll be paying about 3 or 4 years longer, but they could buy a brand new car, cheaper payment than what your car would be worth on our lot. Well, that'll never do. And I says, well, just a minute, let me get the manager. And I'd reach under the desk, and I'd bring Danny out in his suit, and he basically just say, well, Danny, these people, lovely people here want to know why their car's only worth this much money. Because Danny would come up with because it's a piece of junk. And at the end of the day, after these people have been to every lot in town, who are they going to remember? Danny, not me. Not me. Just like the drunk buying Danny drinks. It was Danny all along. So then what happened after that? So that's when I went to Butch Arts and drove the Model T. Great job. So I went to the optometrist one day, and he said, well, I got some bad news for you. You got macular degeneration. You're going to be blind in 3 to 5 years. And this was 10 years ago. So I said, huh? That doesn't work for me. Because I was just getting up to the point where I'm going to retire. And I got so much stuff I want to see. So he says, well, that's the way it is. You can treat it with vitamins and all this type of stuff. So I got my dark glasses, I got my vitamins and all this type of stuff. Happy to say it has progressed a little bit, but I've still got basically 20/20 vision when I've got my glasses on. But this made me smarten up. All of a sudden I started thinking, well, I've got so much to see. And then I found out I was overweight, which wasn't too hard. I just looked in the mirror. But I also had high blood pressure. I didn't know that until I went into like I used to joke to my wife, I says, well, I'm going to go for my annual checkup. So I go up to Shoppers and shove my arm in the deal. And everything was always fine. Always had low blood pressure. Everything was, perfect blood pressure. Perfect. No problems at all. I go in there one day, and I shove this thing in, and I push the button, and you know how it squeezes and squeezes, and then it just lets go, and you get the little tag. So it's in there squeezing and squeezing. I'm looking around, squeezing. All of a sudden it lets go, and all of a sudden this red screen starts flashing and says, retaking, sit still. So, okay, so this is interesting. Never seen this before. So off it went down again, and then came up and it said, seek immediate medical assistance. The blood pressure was off the end. So, of course, I did the right thing and went home and had lunch. And I thought, well, maybe it's a malfunction, so I'll go over to this other one over by Prairie Inn over there in the Shoppers Drug Mart. So I went over there. So I shoved my arm in. The pharmacist is walking down, and he stops, and he looks, and he goes, you okay? And I says, why? He says, well, that's a record. I've never seen that before. You're right off the end. He says, you better call your doctor and get in there right away. I says, I can't do that. And he goes, why not? And he says, well, the doctor's been dead for 15 years. So he wasn't that great anyway. So I said, I'll go to the hospital. And this was at the beginning of COVID. I go down to Sanj Pen, and there's a lineup out through the parking lot like it's Black Friday sale down at Best Buy in the States type thing. I mean, like, there was no way. I would not make it. It was hot out, too. So I just went home, phoned my brother, and says, when you had your heart attack, what was that like? He said, oh, it wasn't that bad, you know. So I decided I had to do something about my blood pressure. So I finally got into a clinic. Didn't have to use any medication. I just started walking and walking and walking. I was up to about 28,000 steps a day, you know. And then my hip started hurting, so I had to back it off a little bit. So I got my blood pressure under control and all this type of stuff, and I still working with the puppets. I was doing, since the beginning of the pandemic, I do a 30-second video every day, because we're only going to be shut down for 2 weeks. You know, so I figured for 2 weeks I could do little videos. So I started that, and they started to take off on YouTube because I started making a bit longer. So I was, back then it was called Isolation with Danny, what it was like to be isolated with a dummy. And so that's how my channel got started. And then I started walking, and then I found out that the puppet and the walking didn't work. People wanted to watch the walking videos, didn't want to watch the puppets, or vice versa. So finally, to get my numbers up where I wanted to be serious about my walking channel, I moved the, if you want to see the puppets, it's at Bruce's Puppets on YouTube now. It's Bruce's Puppets is my channel on YouTube for that. And I started the Walking with Bruce. And it wasn't that long after I got like a call from Paul that he was just moving, this is a year, just over a year ago in March, and he was moving to town. And he wanted some information on rickets bog, so he sort of like Googled it, and I just happened to have a video on rickets bog. So he watched it, I guess he liked it, and he probably watched a couple at that time, and then he sent me an email, or I can't remember how we got together. I think he just commented on the, and I got a hold, we got together. And the next thing I know, I'm on Shaw TV. So that was interesting. And Victoria Buzz did a story on me, on my 600th episode I did on my channel. And overnight I picked up 182 subscribers, where I was used to pick up 1 or 2 maybe every couple weeks, you know, so it really, really took off. And now I get people calling me all the time from all over the world. I get emails. Like in the morning now, when I get up in the morning, this morning actually I got emails from India, Bulgaria, Siberia, South Africa, Australia, and people really enjoy my videos. And the ones that are really, really enjoy it are the people that can't get out and walk anymore. Yeah. You know, and they say, they bring back so many memories. Todd Inlet, oh, you did one on Todd Inlet. He says, my husband and I used to love going down to Todd Inlet, but he died a few years ago and I've got mobility problems, I can't get out there until now. He says, you took me back to Todd Inlet. And then I started finding obscure parks, like Brownswood Trail out there in central Saanich. If you've never been up there, it's really, really interesting. I've got video on it. And I've done all of the little parks around Royal Oak. I did a whole bunch on the little parks that are hiding over here in Broadmead, all the little parks and that. So it's sort of like snowballed from, here's this kid that couldn't add 7 plus 7, and all of a sudden I got people from all over the world wanting to talk to me. I was just in Edmonton. I had someone recognize me in Edmonton. Since I've been on Shaw, I'll be pumping gas. They go, hey Bruce, loved your walk this morning. You know, it's great. So that's why I'm here in front of you today. It's all because of having an issue in school when I was 9 years old. Any questions?
Really interesting. Thank you so much. And you gave us a real positive, ongoing, always moving forward. And you had your didn't you have some down times? Didn't you have some sort of despairing things where you thought it's just there's no point in this? Were you ever ready? Okay, because you didn't address it, and I thought, this man is a miracle. Well, and then I hear all the other people who have really achieved.
Well, when I went to see the psychiatrist, I was having stomach problems because I didn't want to go to school. I couldn't get up in the morning. This teacher was still there. Like he was, and it was a shame because it was him that was causing all my stress and anxiety, and they protected him and made me the bad guy. And that fella ended up in a residential school when he finally did get fired on Quadra Island. Oh, great. Yeah.
And that's when you were a youngster, and then when you got out into the big world and you were discovering this and that, and Danny was by your side, those times, you're a human. You must have had some times where you thought, is it really worth it? What kind of a journey am I on?
Yeah, well, I became the class clown too. So I always liked to make people laugh, and if I ever got stuck, I'd just tell a joke. And I had all these jokes I used to go back to all the time. And I like to make people laugh, and I really get a kick. That's another reason why I have Danny in that, because the funny thing is, whenever the salesman down there at the dealership would hear me say, well, just a minute, let me get the manager. You can see them get out of their desk and they come over and they'd be sitting there like this, waiting to get the reaction from the people. And Danny had his own cards down there too. The dealership even printed up his own cards. And Danny sold a lot of cars. Yeah, so, no, it worked out really, really well for me. And sorry, Gary, I didn't bring Danny, but I've been away. I just got back from vacation. I've been away for 3 weeks. I was filming up through the Rockies and Valemont, and I've done Maple Ridge, and Edmonton. I've done lots of filming up there, which is now available at Walking with Bruce on, on YouTube. And if anyone wants one of my cards, see me at break, and I'll give you a card. It's got my emails, it's got everything else, and I'll also show you how to get to my channel so you can check it out. I have fun on my channel too. You know, I have a lot of fun on my channel too. I keep it very entertaining.
You're really inspiring. You're really an amazing inspiration. And thank you so much, because you've added some encouragement to the things that I go through. And I think I'm one of a whole lot of people, because we really are.
Everybody's going through something. I mean, I don't care who you are. Everybody's going through something. And it's how you meet it head on to get through different things. I mean, like I had times, you know, when I didn't know what I was going to be doing. And the biggest scare, though, I did get was when I found out I was losing my eyesight. That really threw me for a loop, because I didn't know. I mean, like, I started appreciating everything I could think of. I mean, that's why I was into all these parks. And I'm not just into these parks just to wander around and look at the trees and all that. I'm down on my hands and knees taking pictures of slugs and stuff like this, and mushrooms, and these are all in my videos. And I never appreciated this stuff before. And all the birds and everything. And I just did one that came out yesterday, and it was down at the Horticultural Center of the Pacific. I've been on the island for 61 years and never been in there. So I turned up and went in there, and I did a video in there that came up yesterday. It's doing really, really well. But someone says, oh, you missed this, you missed this. And I said, on my emails this morning, and I said, well, actually I didn't. I left 41 minutes of footage on the cutting room floor because I didn't want to put an hour video up. I like to keep my videos anywhere from about 9 to 12 minutes. And the Horticultural Center yesterday was 18 minutes. It was the longest one I've ever put up. No complaints about the length of it, but I covered everything I wanted to cover and I thought was the most important to me and to let people see. Like, in one of the parts I stopped halfway through and I'm sitting down and I'm talking to the camera. I said, man, I'm beat. I mean, this place is much bigger than it used to be. And I says, well, I guess I better wander back to the car. Oh, another garden. And off I go again. So, you know, I kept it, keep it rolling, keep it entertaining. So, but thank you very much for your question. And anybody else wants a break time here wants to ask me anything, by all means, come up and have a chat. All right, thank you.
A friend of mine said, don't be nervous. Get a laugh out of them and that loosens it all up. Well, I really wanted to go home. You've heard of Irene, my wife. We married in 1956. We have 5 kids, 3 sons and 2 daughters. They're all living in the Victoria area. But I really want to start talking about my dad and my mom first, if I can. Dad was born near Bristol in England. And when he was 13 years old, he came with his uncle and his dad to Alberta and homesteaded in a place called Berry Creek. It's a couple hundred miles east of Calgary. These guys came out from England in a very sedate life in England. My grandfather was a baker. And they came out in March and got snowed in before they even found their homestead markers. They put up with all the hardships of the prairie, the hailstorms and the drought, and they got initiated. Took a few years, I think. In 1916, Dad joined the Army, the Canadian Army, and they came to Willow's camp over in Oak Bay, or wherever it is over there. In fact, they were here during that big snowstorm in February in 1916, and my dad helped shovel snow. From then, they were shipped over to Russia and a battalion, and they rode the Siberian Railroad. Their mission was to help suppress the Bolshevik uprising, I believe. They never saw a combat at all over there. When Dad got back in 1928, when he married this Scottish school teacher who came out from Calgary and was teaching in a one-room schoolhouse. You've all read about them. But by the end of 1930, they had 6 kids. My old sister was Ruth. She passed away this last November at age 92. My brothers Doug and Jim have since passed away, and so has my sister Wynne. And then in December 1930, they had a baby boy. They called him John, but they named him Jack. So that's where I came on board. And soon after a little baby girl was born, they called her Joy. We quickly became bosom buddies, of course. Joy Hampton is still around, and we're still bosom buddies in a different way. You're supposed to laugh at that one too, but I'm kind of bombing out. In 1933, the whole family moved to Victoria, and my dad started up a dairy farm with my uncle Gordon Swan and his family down on Oak Street, down where campus auto sales are right now. Also, about that time, my sister Frances was born. Frances sitting over there. At 1937, we moved to North Quadra, and we rented the farm from the Bull family. And Joy and I started grade 1. We did 8 years at Cloverdale, then we did 4 years at Mount View High School. In 1945, the Bull family wanted to move back in the stone house. We built a new house on Beckwith Avenue. And, having Joe Bull, he was the chief of police for Saanich, of course, and it was pretty good having him next door. He'd call me over once in a while because I was speeding in my Model A. And once one of the guys worked for me borrowed my old .22 rifle and shot one of his goose, whatever. I heard about that one. But they were great neighbors, and it was almost great to have them next door. In those days, my association with Royal Oak area was pretty limited. I did go up and visit the blacksmith. I don't remember his name. He even let me wind the crank to blow on his fire, and it was interesting watching him work. There was a little small restaurant there that the old-timers here remember, the other old-timers. Shea Ernest. Well, he bought bull calves for me, and he raised them in the field right behind him, where the shopping center is right now. And we bought, Dad dealt with Otto Wilner. Well, you remember Otto Wilner, any of you? You know, in 1949, he sold Dad a battery, $16, a new battery for the tractor. And he sold gas to Dad in 45-gallon drums for 49 cents a gallon. I thought you'd be interested to hear that. That's the days when we were selling milk for 10 cents a quart. In 1948, we built a brand new milking party. You'll see it over in the picture. And it's the first one on Vancouver Island. It saved the labor so much that Dad farmed us out. My brothers and I took turns doing cement, working for a contractor on the cement gang. And we drove the Shepherd's Dairy truck picking up the cans of milk from farms along Curie Road and Glanford Avenue and up to the Mr. Green farm on Santa Clara and a whole bunch of farms up in Central Sandwich. In 1943, we rented the Rithett property. That was about 100 acres almost. We shared the rent with the Swan relatives and the Birkinshaws. Brian's here tonight. He went to Royal Oak School here. They lived in the farmhouse for a while. You know, Rithett Farm, to me, just a dreamland. It was like a wilderness of hills and valleys and frog ponds, and there was a mine, a gold mine, I think, up there, and many varieties of trees and birds. I remember laying on my back and looking high up into the sky to try and find the meadow larks or skylarks, I can't remember which they were, and they sang so sweetly up in the air. I also remember laying on my back watching the pilots from Pat Bay practicing their stalls and spins. In fact, I was so inspired doing that, I went and later I got my own pilot license. I didn't do a lot of flying, but once I took Irene out and trying to impress her, and we had taxied out to the on our little Fleet Canuck aircraft. We taxied out to the apron and did our warm-up, and then I tried to radio the radio to get permission to take off. But on the way out, it was a different aircraft, and I pulled down the master switch and shut off the radio, so I couldn't get out. So in the mirror, I could see the props from a big Trans-Canada Airline aircraft pulled up behind me, waiting to take off, and so I wheeled the thing over off into the gravel, and I got stuck in the mud. I'm the only guy in the world who ever got stuck in the mud, and so they sent the club guy to come out and rescued me. Getting back to the farm, the Rithett's farm went up right up behind the cemetery. Dad and Mom were away on a trip once, and Joy and I got woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning and found ourselves in the Sands police car riding around the cemetery chasing heifers that got out. We were driving around past gravestones and newly planted areas. I can sense that our resident grandparents were turning it around a little that night. In 1954, we bought the bog, that 96-acre bog. We owned it for about 10 years. But we used brush cutters and rotavators and half tracks on the Fortune tractors, and we ditched there and we pumped water like crazy so we can plant earlier for our crops. One time we had 2 tractors stuck, and a Copley bulldozer got stuck, and then finally he brought in heavier equipment, and took him 2 days to wind all that mess out of there. That bog was very treacherous. You had to be awfully careful around it. We lost a cow down in there and had to tow her out with a tractor. That was something I never forgot. Actually, with us pumping the water out like we did, and we kind of dried out the swamp, the bog too much, and the willow trees got established in there. It took years, and they grew and grew. Rithic Bog Conservation Society, which I joined, got together with Sanish Parks and Ducks Unlimited, and they finally figured a way out to get the bog back to the way it should have been. In 1960, my brothers fell in love with the Peace River area, and they moved up there and left me home on the farm alone. My dad had retired. He passed away in 1964. So I ended up milking and buying more cows. Eventually, I shipped milk to the Island Farms Dairy. 1968, I sold out, and I started working in the dairy for 19 years or so. I drove the tank trucks and the semi-trailers, and then become distribution supervisor for the last 15 years. I'm not going to spend time talking about Island Farms. That's a whole other story. But I retired in 1987 after my 1985 heart attack. So that leaves us right now enjoying life as we get older and trying to live happier ever after. And so that's the end of my story. And if you want to ask a question about the picture, I'll hang around. Bill Street for a while, and we took turns. I picked up milk there from time to time myself. Yeah. There was a lot of dairy farms. There was over 100. We were called producer vendors before the big dairy got established, all selling their own milk. It was quite interesting, yeah.
Where did you go to school?
Went to school at Cloverdale for 8 years. Remember Miss Bossy? I think she taught out here. Is that right, yeah? And then we went to Mountain View. We graduated in 1949. And I think I'm older than some of you guys. Yeah.
I always understood that the Bulls had a dairy farm there too. Now, what is
I found out that this Bull Senior, which would be your grandparents-in-law, bought that land in 1907, and they were dairy farming there. I've heard that the Shepherd family kind of finished dairy farming there, but by 1936 or 37, when we rented the farm, it was all gone.
Joe's father? He used to deliver milk, and his slogan was the only Bulls milk in town. But he was always a farm there, started a dairy.
Yeah, all the barns were there.
Yeah, what is it?
All, they were all there. There was behind there was a big, huge hay barn, huge thing, and another what we call the calf barn. Dad tore down the hay barn and moved the calf barn over up against the other side of that barn. So the barns were all there in place with all the stanchions and everything. We were milking by hand in those days. I say we. I hardly ever learned how to milk by hand, but the time I got old enough, we had the machines. You see by the Jersey there. We switched over to registered Holsteins and later on.
Is that the barn that had the Drury Richmond?
Yes. Oh, you remember that? I didn't put it there. Yeah, yeah. I don't know how much Dad saved by having that roof on it, but I think my dad was pretty good at getting good prices. It sounds better than saying Jewing people down, but when he got gas from the garage for 26 cents a gallon, that's pretty good. Yeah.
Jack mentioned about how we used to roller skate in that old barn.
Oh, really? We did that. Brian and I hung around quite a bit, and we have some stories we won't tell, but yeah. We did roller skate. The close end of that barn, it didn't have stalls in it like you see down the middle. And my memory is going around, and there was a big coil of barbed wire hanging on the wall, and I still have the scars from sticks on the roller skates. I got too close. Yeah. Yeah, good memory with Brian. And when they farmed over on Torquay, I think it was, near Shelburne Street. No, I won't tell that story. Don't They're good years, and talking about the Rethett property, I just love that place. I go out there and have picnics out there. It would have made a top-notch regional wilderness park for Greater Victoria if they hadn't put houses on. You couldn't believe the stuff that went on in that land. The Boy Scouts used it. The army camps went out there with their Bren gun carriers and their motor shells, and Brian remembers that. And they were great years. I'd do it all over again if I could. Yeah.
Did you hunt in the Rethett area?
I didn't. I was not a hunter, but a lot of other people were there. They hunted pheasants, of course, and the ducks in the back of our property. Yeah. I remember Dr. Yolden showing up in the barn when I was sweeping it out one day, and with a big gun there. I couldn't figure that one out. He was hunting pheasants right on our property. Yeah, but you don't see pheasants anymore. I don't anyway. Are they around?
No, there's no pheasants there now.
We ran on the we ran our heifers and dry cows out on the property, and one year a deer, one of the Salt Spring, one of the Sydney Island deer came over and wintered with a group of our heifers. Quite interesting.
How many cows did you have to find up the
When I finished, before I sold out, we got up to 100 animals, including the heifers and the calves and the dry cows. I was milking 65 cows twice a day there before I ended up. Yeah. The city grew around us, and it didn't feel like a farm anymore. There's too many houses.
Who was the vet when you were farming?
The early vet was a Dr. McEwen, and then it was Dr. The guy on. See it again? Dave Gaunt, yeah. And his son become a vet too, and I have him working on my sheep. I had some sheep for a while. Yeah. But I'm starting to forget names like you wouldn't dream of, so I don't remember half the people I know. I even forget your name sometimes. That's pretty good.
Thank you very much, John.
Man, man.